Hello Internet, this is my solo playthrough of ASLSK scenario S19 Purple Heart Lane. Basics of this scenario is there will be an American force entering from the north here and a small German force here with more Germans coming in here. The victory conditions are the Americans will win at the game end if they control greater than or equal to 6 buildings below this line. Now, after turn 4, the Germans can start getting their MMCs off the board, and for every MMC that departs the board, the American victory condition increases by 1. So for the Germans, it's either a case of come in here, put up a big fight, stop the Americans taking anything, and hold firm, or if the Americans do get a foothold here, there's 4 or 5 easy buildings to get. When it looks like they're going to get their 6th, and start trying to get everyone off the board, and hopefully they won't just drop through that and take every single building available. So a lot of the setup is enforced, so the Americans have to set up some in Hex Z7, some in CC7, and their first term reinforcements come in through CC7, and the Germans have to set up their first element here, and their second element comes in anywhere along this bottom line here, between Q0 and Q10. Onto setup. So as stated, a lot of the setup's enforced. These guys have to be here, these have to be here. All of these troops have to enter on this hex coming in from that road. The Germans have set up in buildings here to best lay down some defensive fire and hopefully avoid any major casualties. These Germans are going to come in somewhere along the south on their first turn. So the Americans are going to begin, and main aim was just going to be to get as many of these forces into this couple of buildings in this first turn as possible. On to turn 1. After turn 1, the Americans have made a good advance. They got a 747 into this hex with the 7 nil leader and the 238 half squad. So the result of that melee was on the second turn round, the Americans defeated the Germans in that hex. They have a chance to grab that German LMG, and they have got control of their first building. They're 1 down, 5 to go at this point. They've took a bit on the advance there from defensive fire, so there is a wounded leader who has routed back up to that building up there. That was a 9-2 leader, so quite a useful one to have on their side. But of course now he's wounded, he's not as useful as before. The Germans have made a good advance into protect the core of the buildings, because although now this entire group here is quite open, along with this one, those 4 should really be quite easy captures for the Americans, as long as the Germans can hold them off long enough here to make a break off board. Then the Germans currently have the slight upper hand, I think. I mean, there's not a lot in it so far, but the way I see it, the Germans have a slightly higher chance. So, on to turn 2. At the end of turn 2, the American forces have been accelerating their advance. So they have now taken 4 of the victory buildings required. They have got a broken leader and squad that was reduced to half squad that had to route up to here. The last surviving German leader from the original setup in the middle here is broken, wounded, but did successfully route to here. So the remaining Germans are all good order. The idea now for the Germans is just to suppress as much fire as possible and slip this guy off, slip one of those guys off there, try and just build up the victory requirements to an unachievable level. They've got 4 buildings now, they could get 5, 6, 7 relatively easy. So if you can get one guy off here and just have these guys lay enough defensive power to keep them at bay for the next couple of turns, they might get away with it. So, on with turn 3. So at the end of turn 3, the Americans have not made much of an advance at all here. On their turn, they managed to lay down quite a lot of smoke here, smoke grenades in the movement phase, and moved along. But the defensive fire from these guys, built a lot of resid, stopped them in their tracks, and everyone who got anywhere near was pinned. Going into the German turn, we had 2 stacks here of Americans. These ones were broken and have now had to route here. And this stack here, this 548, managed to place the DC there. And this is the first time in the 20 odd games I've played that I've actually successfully managed to place a DC and not been shot on my way there. Got there, they survived all the defensive fire, all the subsequent first fire, all the final fire, then rolled bloody boxcars on the DC. So the first time I've ever been able to do anything fun on that 30 firepower chart. Bang, useless. But that said, they had this stack here right next to them with a leader and with a captured gun. So they were laying, I think, 20 firepower on them at one point. So they did very well to survive. The Germans in general did really well to hold back the advance by the Americans on this turn. But they're rolling boxcars on that DC. Yeah, that really wound me up. On to turn 4. Again, the Americans going to try and recover what they can, push through. I think this building's probably going to get taken this turn. But now that would only get up to 5 buildings for the Americans. But now we're at the point where we can start getting troops out of there to increase the victory conditions. So if they slip off and make it a 7, I'm not sure if they'd probably get there. So they'd have 6 in total, and then just have to try and keep them out of these buildings here for a couple of turns. So it's not looking as good for the Germans as it was, in all honesty. But the Americans have been slightly picked apart. There's been a couple of casualty reductions, a few people knocked out. So they have less advancing, but they've still got 3 turns to take 3, 4, 5 buildings. Now, if they get into this area undefended, going CX, they can jump through building after building and control. So, on to turn 4. So, at the end of the turn 4, things have gone drastically wrong for the Americans, mostly thanks to the luck of the dice. So, the advance up here was shocking. The smoke generally worked, but the defensive fire, I rolled 3 snake eyes. KIA result on one stack approaching, got the KIA result on the stack that was on this building heading here from this guy, and the stack that was here moved in here for close combat. And not only did I get ambushed for the Germans, they got snake eyes and wiped them out without any chance of retaliation. So all that leaves the Americans with now is this one squad here with a leader. They are now on top of a LMG, so they might be able to pick that up and have a little more firepower. Got these 2 broken squads here. I think one of them may actually be a half squad. Let's have a little look. No, 2 broken squads there, and we've got this 1 wounded leader. And we still have all these stacks here. Got German here, sat on top of a weapon, which, funnily enough, the Americans picked up a German LMG here, brought it in here when they went to do the close combat, and dropped it because they died. So it's been delivered to them if they can pick it up. So yeah, the German plan of hold them back and then get off board so they can't get the victory conditions, that doesn't matter anymore. The Americans have got control of 4 buildings. A broken stack here, we've got enough firepower to keep them broken. I mean, we've got a wounded leader that can jump on there, but I'm not sure if that'll make a huge amount of difference. And this squad out in the open here, I think we're going to be able to get rid of them before they can take a building. So even if every squad split up, at most that's 3 extra buildings, and that's 7 victory points. But in the amount of time it would take to get there, this guys can get off, these guys can get off. So As is the case with ASL, the tides turn on the dice, and when it looked a bit rough for the Germans with the approach, they've completely changed that. Now the Americans are fighting just to stay alive. On to turn 5, even though at this point I think the Germans have secured a victory. So at the end of turn 5, things have gone from bad to worse from the Americans as expected. The Germans, they managed to rally everyone that was broken and remaining, and they recovered the LMG here, and the small stack that was forming here was managed to rout. They did manage to get back to a safe location with minimal issues. They survived their interdiction rolls. At this point, I'm going to call the game one turn early because regardless of what happens, there is no way this stack can take another 2 buildings. And with another German turn, all I'd have to do is move these off there, and they've got to take another 3 buildings. So, that's just unreasonable. All that was left at the end for the Americans was this 9-1 leader, 747, 337, a wounded 9-2 leader, and this last little broken, DM'd. Oh, let's flip him. 747. Still haven't got the hang of flipping counters with the tweezers, as useful as they are. So, this little pile of shame for the Americans. Even if they'd have recovered everything and split apart, there was no way they would have gained control of another 3 buildings in that one turn. No way. So, overall, the way this played out, I think it did quite well for both sides. The Americans getting this cluster, I think in this scenario, they are always going to get those 4 buildings. With the half squads that start there for the Germans, there is no way they can survive what comes down this road. Just no way. The entire battle comes on how the Americans get from here to here. And I think the Germans were spread out in a good way. In hindsight, I wouldn't have given this squad the DC. I'd have given them an LMG and possibly the 9-1 leader. Maybe not. I mean, they're right on the front. They're right on the front, so they could do with Neg 1 when they're shooting doing prep fire and doing defensive fire. But also, it's a big risk to put such a powerful leader there. But overall, I think the defense worked fine. They had the shots when they had to. They stopped everyone coming. And I also think the American assault was fine. So they came here. There's no sense for them to go out to this part of the open. They've got to cross the road here, concentrate as much prep fire as they could spare to get rid of this guy, and they did all they could to lay smoke here. And they generally laid quite a bit of smoke there during the movement phase, but not enough to completely cross the road. They'd get 1 or 2 here, then they'd still have a couple of empty errands and they'd roll high. But at the end of the day, the Americans got stuck by the dice. When it came to cross the road and when it came to the defensive fire of the Germans were rolling low on all of their shots, the Americans were rolling high on all of their morale checks, and it just worked for them because of the dice. That is what I love about ASL. Not only do I love the interplay of systems and the way that even during the opposing turn you've got ways of reacting and controlling what they do. What I love most about it is that even though you've got the best plan, the dice can screw you, and that can change the game. Although the dice can screw you and it might seem unfair, that's war. Sometimes you just get unlucky. You see some hex and counter war games where you just compare the values on the counters and this battalion of tanks has an attack of 7 and this battalion of tanks has a defense of 4, so the 7 beats the 4, so we'll remove that counter. The dice is what turns this game from an exercise into a story, and that is what I love about ASL. I enjoyed this scenario. I do really think this is really well balanced. I think there's a good chance for both sides to win. In this side, the Americans got stuffed, like I said, because of the dice, but I'd happily play this one again. And it was such an enjoyable game. it's games like this that make me really look forward to buying the ASL rulebook and Beyond Valor and getting into full ASL and adding all the additional chrome that comes with it. As always, I don't want to feed the Google algorithm. I don't want you to subscribe and like and add my Patreon and click the notify bell. But I would really, really like it if you guys could drop a comment, whether it's just what you think I did wrong, what happened when you played this scenario, what scenario you think I should play next, anything like that. I always love chatting to the people who watch these videos. So come in, say hi. Who knows, we could be besties this time next week. So until then, happy gaming.